Good morning and welcome to Fired Up. I'm your host for the show, Bob Irwin. My panel guest this morning, getting up this early, firearms instructor from the gun store, Mike Rogers, who's worked for me for years and years. One of my regular attorneys, Alan Butel,
Hi, Bob.
a lawyer here in Las Vegas, generally doing defense work. Michael Potter, also a lawyer here in Las Vegas, does a little bit of wealth management things now, but is an attorney also. And Randy Sutton, retired from Metro PD as a lieutenant, been in all the levels of the police department, and now an author of several books on police work.
That's it.
We are this morning, in our usual event, as listeners know, we talk about cases that have to do with guns, politics, and self-defense. And there is probably no hotter case in the media today than the Trayvon Martin Zimmerman case that is about to go to trial in Florida. We're taping this a few weeks before the trial is supposed to start. If you have not heard of this case, this was an individual, Mr. Zimmerman, who was on a neighborhood watch program in Florida, walking around his condominium units in Florida. In the middle of the night or late in the evening, he was approached apparently, or saw an individual he thought might be a burglar that was around the building. They had some contact, which obviously there are lots of opinions as to where the contact was and who was at fault. Mr. Zimmerman eventually fired his concealed pistol, which was licensed, and killed Trayvon Martin. There have been lots of stuff in the news media. We're going to start out just by talking about the case and how it started, and what the opinion of the panelists would be as to where this case is going and what's good and what's bad. And I'm going to start out with Randy Sutton, looking at it as a police case. The chief ended up resigning. We had lots of stuff going on. Give me a summation.
This was a very politically charged case because of the racial issues involved. White man shooting a black kid who may or may not have been involved in some suspicious conduct. And when this originally broke, the police department originally made the decision not to charge George Zimmerman, and because of the political ramifications of what took place in the next few days, he was charged. The police chief wound up resigning, and a huge issue going all the way up to the President of the United States weighing in with in my opinion, some bizarre comment about Trayvon Martin could have looked like him if he had a son. I mean, it was the President of the United States weighing in on a criminal case prior to it being adjudicated, in my opinion, is misconduct at the highest levels, and also, tends to weigh in the defense and the prosecution. So I think that there's a lot of issues here that are going to be very inflammatory, and once we see from the trial a lot more information without the filtering of the media involved, I think we'll get a much better sense of what really took place on that night.
Hopefully.
Randy's
Mr.
got a
Potter?
really good point, because the media bias and the types of things that have been fed to the public in the way of pictures and comments and demonstrations, etc., are all based on a lot of series of assumptions. And the assumptions are going to be tested at trial if both sides can get their evidence in. One of the things that's a challenge right now is that both sides are using the public for a court of public opinion type of trial. And I'm looking forward to the actual trial itself, where we can see the evidence itself presented without any filtering through the media as to what really happened.
I've got to just go back and ask you, Alan, while it's on the top of the discussion here. Have you ever heard of a case in the criminal calendar where the president weighed in on it?
No, I mean, this is consistent with the president weighing in when we had the professor trying to get into his own home, and he was investigated as a potential
summit,
burglar,
yeah.
and they ended up having the beer summit. It's just it's idiotic that happened. But commenting on the pre-trial processes, it was amazing to me that the investigative personnel that got involved with this case determined that Mr. Zimmerman had not committed any crime for which charges were appropriate. That wasn't good enough for those who wanted to make this a racial issue, and it went into higher levels within the state of Florida, all the way through up to the FBI. There was push and push and push until ultimately he was charged. And I think he was charged not so much because he committed a criminal act, clearly enough. It's because they have to resolve this with a jury verdict, not make, no one person wants to make the administrative decision not to charge it because they can't. It's too politically charged.
So we're looking at a racially charged case, which really shouldn't be, and I know that annoys everybody involved in this, at least everybody on the side of criminal justice, that we're looking at, what color these people are and so forth. I remember the pictures they ran of Trayvon Martin when he was 12 years old, playing football and so forth. A little misleading in the beginning of this, Michael. I know you've studied the case quite a bit.
I was on the computer watching Fox News when the first announcements came over, and as quote conservative as Fox is supposed to be, he was reported as a white vigilante who murdered a black child.
Wow.
First report I heard on it, and this was why there was no information available at that time. This was just the interpretation of the talking head on the news, and I said, this is going to be an interesting subject matter for our concealed carry classes, because there's going to be a lot of worried people about it, and there are.
Yeah, as I understand, Zimmerman had a concealed carry permit, did he not?
Licensed in the state of Florida.
Licensed in the state of Florida. So we get the pretrial publicity that's going on, which I can't imagine how the people are going to, that are eventually selected for the jury, how they're going to be a jury that hasn't been just engulfed with this case. But I don't think there's any place to move it either.
They're talking about a 500-person jury pool.
Yeah,
it's not been polluted. Good luck with that.
Anyway, we'll have to break for a couple minutes to sell a few things, and we'll get back into this. Don't go away. We'll be right back. And we are back on Fired Up. Bob Irwin here once again with my guest panel. We're going to talk a little more about the Trayvon Martin Zimmerman case. The Counselor, you mentioned some things about what happened before, what's happened originally with them. There was some misleading stuff on NBC about the 9/11 tape and so forth. Go ahead with that.
Well, I think what Mr. Potter was saying, that the evidence is going to start when the trial begins, and all of this pretrial hocus pocus is going to end. And I cite as just one example during our discussion the fact that NBC at one point had aired on national news a audio of the 911 call that was made during the ruckus, and it was doctored to play into those who believed that Mr. Zimmerman was doing something inappropriate. I don't remember the exact details of it, but it was clearly doctored, and they ultimately admitted that it was. And so, I
think that was not that, Michael, in the description of he was Hispanic or black or whatever. And
he gave a description of Trayvon, mostly his clothes and size, and the dispatcher asked what the race was, and he then responded that he was black. They edited the tape to make that part of the initial report. That was one of the reasons there was a problem, because he was black.
So the tape shows it was a black guy I'm going after, or something like that.
And there are those who had suggested that when Zimmerman was on the phone with 911, that he said it was a black person. He never did volunteer that, just as we learned. And that in fact, what Zimmerman was doing was actually at the request of the 911 operator. He was in his car. He was looking around. He saw a person of interest. He called 311. Actually, it was an information-only line, and they were trying to pinpoint where he was, what the address was, so they could send a unit. By that time, Zimmerman had lost track of what street he was on, so he got out of his car and he was looking for an address on a home so that he could identify the street number, or the street and the house number. And it was at that point, while he's wandering around here, that Trayvon Martin accosted him.
That's the theory, and it looks to be what happened. We had the blood evidence originally. There were some photographs taken in the police station that showed no blood on Zimmerman.
Well, this is one of the issues in policing. The skill level of the officers and detectives involved varies greatly, literally from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So if you have an agency that hasn't experienced a lot of homicides, their skill level in documenting the photographic evidence, even processing the scenes, is going to be different than an agency that has the experienced investigators.
Has the specialists.
So there's an issue there, but there's even a greater societal issue here, and that is that in policing, the police cannot do the job by themselves. They require and request citizens to become involved, to report things, they advocate neighborhood watches for just that reason. More eyes, more ability to see what's going on. So we ask people to get involved. This guy, George Zimmerman, gets involved,
yes.
And as a result of this, is now literally in a fight for his life. So what does that essentially tell the citizens of our country when it comes to, yeah, I'm going to help the police now. So this really has a much greater significance than just one single issue.
And you know how many guys volunteered on that HOA to work with the neighborhood watch? How many volunteered? One. Zimmerman. They made him the neighborhood watch commander.
And
because he was the only one.
Part of the tragedy here is that what should have been a straightforward police investigation with competent investigators and police officers and the prosecutor looking at the case turned into a completely enlarged theater of the macabre based upon the assumptions of people about race and about firearms, about self-defense. There was a lot of assumptions that were jumped to here way ahead of time, and that's really what led to this being blown out of proportion. And when you combine that with a biased media who doctored tapes, who changed photographs, who filtered carefully what was released, it makes for a sad comment in our society. So in some ways, George Zimmerman is on trial for his life. In some ways, our society and our values are on trial.
Well, and it's pushed by competing interests. The Martin family attorney specializes in civil rights actions, suing entities such as the Florida community where this happened, the police department, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And is it a surprise that they made a race issue out of it immediately? Does that surprise anybody? And Zimmerman, by the way, is not white.
No,
he's Hispanic,
he's Hispanic
and white.
He was originally reported in several of the media as being white Hispanic. First time I'd heard that description.
That's a new description.
In
now.
Wikipedia, he's described as a multiracial Hispanic.
That's probably
That's
more
Wikipedia for
politically
you.
correct.
We're going to leave that right there.
Nice
We'll be
turn.
back. We got a break for a commercial right here. We'll be back in just a minute. Don't go away. We are back here on Fired Up. Thanks for listening to the commercial messages. While we're here, we had there was a piece in the paper recently that there's a stand your ground defense available in Florida where you can claim your innocence and kill the trial right at this point, that you have a legal right to stand your ground when someone attacks you. And the attorney for Zimmerman chose not to use that defense. Does that make sense to you as a lawyer?
Well, it does in these circumstances. I think one of our frequent guests, Michael Giles, and I were talking about this, and it's come forth that Mark O'Mara had made a decision, I think strategically, that if he's going to put on the stand your ground defense in front of the judge, and she rules in against Zimmerman and makes a decision that he does not have a valid stand your ground defense, then he loses that right to put it on in front of the jury, which in that case would be devastating. If that's how the procedures are in Florida, I agree wholeheartedly with Mr. O'Mara that that was the decision to make. Put it in front of the jury, because juries are always smarter than judges, in my opinion.
So that's a tactical decision, even though there's a law that says in Florida that says he can stand his ground if someone's attacking him.
Yes.
But it's better not to use it in this case because you might waste it. Is
Well,
that the idea?
the decision was whether to put it on in front of the judge alone or whether to put it in front of the jury. And if the judge had looked at that by themselves and made a decision that was against Mr. Zimmerman, then there was nowhere to go with that. But if you have it in front of a jury, there's a better chance of it being successful, and you bring up the right of appeal later on.
Sure, it's
so
a
he-
balancing
he could
test. If the judge says yes, you had the right to stand your ground, then it's over. Game, it's over with. But if he loses that, then he loses that right to put it on in front of the jury,
lose
and
the
I think
whole
that's too much of a risk. I agree with Mr. O'Mara's decision. Absolutely.
Okay, well that makes sense, I guess. It would seem to me you have a thing you can't lose. You say if she rules against you, you can't use that defense. But you could get the whole thing dismissed if you do use the defense. But apparently, tactically, you can lose it when you want to use it on appeal. So, and likely, whichever side wins or loses this, I think we can expect an appeal immediately.
And don't you think it'd be too politically difficult for this judge, who's already demonstrated a willingness to, as in a pretrial decision she made, not to allow prior misconduct attributable to Trayvon Martin, when in fact Zimmerman has been raked through the coals regularly by the prosecution. All of his past misconduct has been discussed roundly, yet Mr. Martin's isn't going to be touched at all, at least in the opening statements. Maybe it'll be relevant, maybe it won't. But when you have somebody who's willing to be that conservative and maybe a little politically delicate situation like this, you don't want to put that decision in her hand.
I can certainly see that the judge is under tremendous pressure because I think we're looking at I'm not talking out of school here, that we're looking at a serious incident. If Zimmerman is found not guilty, I think there's huge pressure on the judge to make sure that he at least looks really bad, because if this thing goes the other way and he's found not guilty, I think we're in for some serious unrest.
A lot of people have already lost jobs and careers over this case already that made decisions that favored Zimmerman.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Who wants to be the next one?
And when law enforcement makes a decision at the charging level, it's not done in a vacuum. They go on the evidence. They go on their if they can gain a conviction, and they look at everything with no political.
And do they generally
aspects of
talk to the
this.
DA at some point
Yes.
in this before
Yes, absolutely. Especially when you're talking about
a murder case, the
a
DA is
death
going to get involved.
situation.
Yeah.
The district attorney is going to be involved at the, generally speaking, very, very soon after the police investigation is commenced.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
I think that there was a DA involved in this.
Murder scenes I have been at, the DA usually arrives before the body leaves. I mean, there's some representative of the DA's office to to get the facts of the case.
But I'm speaking. I don't know what that particular police department's, their rules and regulations
Small department,
are. But you would figure almost all the time that these decisions aren't made by a detective.
Right, the first guy on the
Yeah.
scene is
And
not
then
gonna
on top
try
of
to-
that, you had that when the political firestorm first started up over the department not charging him and the chief of police resigned, etc., they sent all this up to the state level for further, because they really wanted to hammer this guy. So you can see that there's been a political motivation here all along.
Okay, hold the thought, Mike. We're going to break for some commercials here. We'll be right back. Don't go away. We are back for our little final segment here. I want to give everybody, this is a really complicated case too. There is so much we didn't begin to cover. If we got other sponsors out there who want to jump in so we make this show an hour instead of a half an hour, call me at the gun store. We'll take care of that so we have more time to flesh these things out. This is a really, there's a lot of detail left here, but I'm going to put everybody on the panel on the thing here. You've read through a lot more information on the case than we put out here. Trial. Is Zimmerman going to be found guilty or not guilty? I won't even give you a second degree. I'll give you a guilty of something.
I think if he
Or
is
not.
found not guilty, it's a monument to his lawyers. He's got a tough environment.
I personally believe that the evidence is going to come out slowly and methodically, and it is going to favor Zimmerman. Absolutely. And I believe he's going to be acquitted. And it won't be for any other reason than the evidence, and that's it. All these social issues are going to play out in the media. They're going to be very interesting. It's going to be talked about for years, but I think the evidence is going to ultimately support Mr. Zimmerman. He's going to be acquitted.
The jury will look at the evidence and that's it.
They have to. I mean,
has
it comes
come
down
back
to
a
those.
normal case.
Comes down to those moments when Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin encountered one another, and what happened next. And you know, you've got the evidence on Mr. Zimmerman's head. You've got his wounds. You've got the screams for help. You've got the people calling 911. There was, I think, ultimately a rational reason for him to draw his weapon and shoot Mr. Martin, because he was being beaten and was going to lose consciousness and feared death.
Okay, Mr. Potter?
Well, the media and a lot of political types certainly jumped to conclusions in this case, but I'm anxious to see the actual evidence come out, because right then when the jury goes into the jury room, it won't matter what color of skin they each had. It won't matter who they voted for, where they went to school, who they went to the prom with. It
We
will
all
matter
agree.
what will come out
Guilty
at
or
trial.
innocent.
I think he'll come out innocent and be acquitted.
Randy Sutton?
I think that that the original decisions made at the scene by law enforcement were not to charge him, and I think those are the I think that's the legitimate decision that should have been made, and I believe he will be found not guilty.
Okay. We will be back next week at the same time with our Fired Up television show. I hope you found it interesting. Thanks for being our viewer.